So, hi everyone, I'm Chris Ferfeski. My guest today in my IndyCar podcast is Stingray Rob, IndyCar driver, and also the guy who finished Indy Lights as a runner-up. It's really nice to see you, Stingray. I really hope that there are so many fans of your career, and personally I'm one of them. So I'm not gonna ask you about your name because I already know, and I know that your name Stingray is not so common, but I think if fans are wondering, is it your real name? Yeah, it is. So I will start with maybe racing traditions in your family. How did you get interested in racing? How did you end it in IndyCar?
Yeah, and the story kind of starts with my name. With my name being Stingray, it kind of tells part of it because my parents were big Corvette fans. And so I was named after the Stingray Corvette. And because of that, that means my parents were taking me to Corvette Club meetings locally, as well as drag racing and autocross races. So I grew up around cool, old, fast cars. And so from a very early age, that's what I knew and that's what I wanted to be involved in. And for myself, I used to sit in the back seat of my mom's car and used to tell her when she was driving, "Go faster, go faster, go faster." And so that's just what I remember. It's just I always wanted to go faster in a race car. And so about the time I was 4 years old, I watched a video of a driver jumping a go-kart through the air into a foam pit. And when I saw that, 4-year-old me said, "Whoa, that's what I want to do." And so I asked my parents for a go-kart and a foam pit, but I got the go-kart but no foam pit, unfortunately. But it worked out well. We started traveling all over the world for the sake of go-kart racing. And so I've been to quite a few places in Europe, Canada, and then many places in America, and won a few championships there before I got into open wheel racing in 2017 in the Road to Indy, and then worked my way through the ladder system and into IndyCar.
Okay, because you jumped from Indy Lights to IndyCar, and you are a rookie now, there's always many questions about road to Indy or to other series, maybe like single seaters in Europe, maybe F1. I really don't know how is it possible to change the teams maybe every year, or maybe in 2-year cycle. How is it hard to change that, to be competitive, to don't get lost in this?
Yeah, that's a good question because it does seem like drivers in IndyCar move around quite a bit, as well as team members. Oftentimes, you'll see the resume of an engineer or mechanic or something, and it'll say Team Penske, Andretti, Ganassi, McLaren, and now they work for someone else. And so it's just there's constant movement amongst employees in the racing industry, and so I think part of that makes it. It's actually because the series is a spec series. I think that it allows for that. You look at F1, and the teams are very specific to what the development is behind the scenes. You look at Ferrari. Well, they're working on Ferrari parts specifically, and so for that engineer to move to Red Bull would be very difficult because it would be a competing sort of development or contract or anything like that. So because IndyCar is mostly the same products from team to team, it allows that knowledge to be passed from team to team very consistently. And so it does help in the industry where you can see teams do really well some years, and then the next few years, even though the car doesn't change, they can struggle because a member will move. And so that the success in the series is more dependent on individuals, more so than it is as a program in a whole, which is unique to other sports. And so I think for myself, the thing that I've noticed in order to stay competitive amongst that is good communication and trying to be a leader. And as a rookie in IndyCar, it's very difficult because I'm learning a lot. And so a lot of what I'm learning has to be kind of given to me through either mentors or other drivers or the team. And so if I don't have that sort of description or shared knowledge, it makes it more difficult for me to maybe move a team for next year or something like that. But if I remain, those are just building blocks that I can work on for next season.
Okay, speaking about being a rookie in IndyCar, I was speaking with David Malukas some days ago, and he told me that you are his best mate in all the grids.
Really?
So yeah,
That's good. That's good to hear.
You'll be happy with that. As being a European guy, it's hard to avoid comparisons to F1. Personally, I really know that IndyCar is different world. I get that because I'm interested in the sport a few years, but there are always the questions, why is it working like that? Because there are many questions. We don't have this in F1. Why do they do that? There are so many questions about Indy 500, but America is very different from the Europe. In IndyCar there is always a prayer before the race, and as a Christian I totally get it. It doesn't bother me. It's the part of my life. I know you're also Christian. I saw that you have on your screen John 3:16. Yeah.
Yes, correct.
Yeah, I know this quote. And for some people in Europe, that whole climate is weird. They're asking, is that bothering? I don't know. Pit crews or drivers who are not believing in God. What did Did you ever had some negative words about there is always a prayer before the race, or everybody is like, okay, that's the part of tradition?
Yeah, growing up in go-karting, I always shared my faith, and so I used to run. I'd make a cross on my front nose out of pink duct tape, and I'd write a Bible verse on it. And for me, that wasn't so much to shove my faith in other people's faces as much as it was to kind of point a direction away from myself, because I believe that as a Christian, it's our job to do whatever we do to excellence for the glory of God. And I think that beyond sharing my faith, there's also real applicable principles and values that come from my faith that help me in the race car. And so I think for the most part, people do see the prayer before the race. They do see sort of the traditions behind being a Christian. But I think that they can also see the benefits of that. Maybe that's forgiving someone if they make a mistake. It's easier to forgive if you're already forgiven. And so for me, that's been a principle that I think that we can all learn. It's not just in racing, but in life in general. I think that we live in a culture, at least here where I'm at in America, where people are easily offended. And I think that we should be unapologetic in what we believe, in the sense that we can stand up for what we believe and still listen to what people have to say. And I think that if we are always trying to appease everyone and please everyone, we're not going to be true to what our faith is calling us to. And so for myself, I have had, I'm not going to say negative words, but pushback at times, especially in the last year, talking about my faith and the silliness of it at times, or whatever else people might think is not true. And so for me, I actually find encouragement in that, because I know that if I wasn't receiving that, not necessarily penalty, but just criticism, if I wasn't facing that criticism, it would mean that I wasn't doing something right. And that's not to say that all criticism is good, but I think that it's good to not have to please everyone. I think that our goal should be to please God and what He calls us to ahead of anyone here on earth.
Yeah, I can agree with you because in Europe there is a platitude to separate sports from politics or faith from the sport, and for me it's yeah, the sport is the best place to show equality, respect, and other values. So I think it's not true that we can separate this. It's impossible. You, as a person, you always act because of your life values. So it's yeah. I don't like to hear that personally. Okay, let's get back to driving because if when you were announced in Dale Cone in 51 car, I was like, oh, that's the car driven previously by Grosjean or Takuma Sato.
Yeah.
So how did you feel when you realized that the quite famous car? Yeah.
It was very exciting. Before the end of last season, I didn't have plans for what I was going to do this year. I was hoping to be in IndyCar, but we had not really seen the doors open to enter into IndyCar and seats available there. And so when the day finally came where I was able to have a test day in the 51 car, and it was a very successful test, I felt like that was the place that had been open to us, and sure enough, it was. And so it's very cool to see the history of who has been on the team and the success there, and having Roman and Takuma be the most recent drivers of that car. It's kind of cool to see the history of it. I mean, the sort of the backing that it's had, and also the people remember very much who has been in there so far. And so it's a very notable car number, and the team's done a very good job with it in the past. So it was really cool to see as a dream come true. I posted a video when I first got announced of me going around the racetrack, and then also me as a 5-year-old kid sitting in my go-kart in my parents' garage. And I said that 5-year-old kid, I hope, would be proud of where we are now, and I think that he would have been. And so it's kind of cool to kind of see the full circle of like where I've been and where I've come from, and we're really living the dream here.
Okay, thank you. I'm gonna ask you the next question about racing, of course, because you were part of Bump Day at Indy 500, and
Yes.
I was talking with Stefan Wilson also, and he was telling me all the stories because he was a part of Indy 500 a few times in last-minute programs, let's say. So how stressful is Bump Day? Because when I watched my first Indy 500, that was in 2015, I think. Yeah, I was like, why they spent the whole another weekend to qualify? There is a race next Sunday and nothing before that. That's crazy. And after that, I watched the qualifying, and I was like, oh, wait. I appreciate the Monaco Grand Prix qualifying. Yeah, I'm a little freak about this. And now that's my personality for my rest of my life, yeah? So, how stressful is it to know that you can be a part of Indy 500, but you can be bumped?
It's very stressful. I don't want to ever have to do a bump day again. That was a once in a lifetime deal. Never again, please.
I wish you
Yeah, it was very stressful. And, one thing I will say is that I'm thankful for it now because it gave me a better appreciation for the event as a whole and the whole Indy 500. because I saw what it was. I was able to picture in my head what it would be like to not be able to run in it. And when you're on that edge of not knowing or knowing, it makes you take less things for granted. And so for me, I was just like praying through the day, like, okay, I just want to get through this. Like, I don't care if we're 33rd, I just want to make it through. And honestly, like the day itself wasn't so bad. It was just like one of those weekends where we struggled as a team and we couldn't figure it out, but you just have to keep going, keep rolling with the punches a little bit. But as a driver, it's like you have 4 laps to be perfect. And we had to do that again and again and again and again all day long just in order to qualify. And, the littlest mistake, lifting off the throttle 10%, that can mean that you're out of the Indy 500. And so for myself, it was it was a very important day. And I knew that I had to remain focused. And so I was very locked in and engaged. But at the same time, I was, like this before I got in the car, shaking. So, very stressful.
Okay, because you are the first person I'm talking who was in the lights, I got a lot of questions and I know some things, but in Poland there is the F1 is the most popular. The IndyCar is maybe less. Yeah, and basically people don't know most of things about Road to Indy series, about Indy Lights now in the NXT. So how big is the difference between Indy Lights and IndyCar?
It's very big. Last year we were running on a different tire compound than they are this year in Indy Lights. And so for me, the biggest transfer, I think, was from tire to tire. But the car itself is very different. I mean, you're dealing with a much bigger, heavier, longer, wider, faster race car, an Indy car. And I think the biggest difference for myself is the race distance. Because in Indy Lights, you're not doing any pit stops. Races are usually about 45 minutes. And the set of tires that we had wouldn't really wear out. There was never a huge drop-off. You would see the progression of the tire. First couple laps, it'd be very, very good. And then as the race progressed, it would slowly go down little by little. And in IndyCar, it's more of like a bell curve. You see it like this, and then kind of like that.
Oh.
And so it's a much larger drop-off. And the reason for that is because the tires don't have to last as long because we're doing pit stops now. And so there's different strategies that are applied behind the scenes, as well as the physicality of the IndyCar. I mean, you have to have a lot of endurance because the races are no longer 45 minutes. They're closer to 2.5, maybe 3 hours long. And so for a race that, for example, is through the streets of Nashville, when it's, I don't know what it is in centigrade, but 95 degrees Fahrenheit, it's very hot in the car. It's around 130 degrees in the cockpit. And so your body is under a lot of pressure, and then that affects your mind as well. And so we have to train at a higher level in between races for IndyCar than I did in Indy NXT, and in the preparation as well. I mean, with the engineering side as well as the media side, there's a lot more attention around IndyCar than there was in Indy Lights. And so that can be a distraction if you don't know how to handle it.
Okay, that the diagrams you showed me about tires are I really love the technicalities because I'm somehow an engineer, so it's I'm a freak about it. Okay, so I got another question about Indy Lights, because there are some teams that have IndyCar teams, I mean, that have their teams in Indy Lights, like Andretti or Dale Cohn, but I'll ask about this later. H&B Motorsports, yeah. So it's in Indy Lights. The task is, I hope, to develop drivers to the level of IndyCar. So how much does the Andretti team in IndyCar have in common with the team in Indy Lights?
They're very much separate programs. I mean, they're in the same building, but they are run by different people, different managers, different mechanics. And the reason for that is because a lot of times drivers that run on the Andretti Indy Lights team or Indy NXT team now, they'll probably go somewhere else for a year or two in IndyCar before coming back to Andretti or something like that. And so they don't want their secrets, their developments to be leaked to other teams. And so I think a lot of times there is a division, and but that's not to say they can't benefit from each other either. Andretti has a lot more resources in Indy Next than maybe someone else that doesn't have an IndyCar team, because they have that shop with all the same production devices, whether it be CNC machines or just even the brain power. You're dealing with more engineers, so if there's ever a big problem, they can go to the IndyCar engineers and say, hey, do you have an idea about this? And that collaboration allows them to improve different things in different ways. And so last year, what I got to experience with Andretti Indy Next versus IndyCar was because of my engineer. And he worked on the IndyCar side as an assistant, or what they call a performance engineer, for many years. So he worked with Ryan Hunter-Reay, Zach Veach, and other drivers in the IndyCar series. And then he was my head engineer in Indy Next. And so he had that connection between the both of them. And so he was able to go and get video to see what the IndyCar drivers were doing that I could apply to Indy Next. So if there was a new track, like for example, Nashville was new to Indy Next last year, there might be bumps that are specific to each turn, or a manhole cover, or the bridge across there. There's certain lines that you have to take in order not to bottom out the car. And without that experience that the IndyCar drivers had, we wouldn't have been able to learn as quickly. So oftentimes there's a lot of shared resources, but not so much the secrets.
Okay, that's interesting approach. Okay, let's talk about your current team, Dale Coyne Racing. The confusing part of this team is when you look at the starting list, the entry list in races, you can see that there is Dale Coyne Racing with Rick Ware Racing and with HMD Motorsports. I mean, how is that look like practically? Are there, two different teams with Dale Coyne name, or is it something different?
It's more of an alliance, a partnership currently, because HMD is David Malukas.
Yeah.
And so it's David Malukas' father that runs HMD Indy Next. And so they're in different shops, different resources. So they're quite separate. But I think that for introducing drivers to IndyCar, it gives them an opportunity. So I think some of the Indy Next HMD drivers can go sit on the timing stand for HMD in IndyCar and kind of listen in and just get some feedback as well. But for the most part, they're very two separate programs that don't share a lot of the same things. Because, for example, Dale Coyne Racing is based out of Chicago, whereas HMD is based out of Indianapolis. And so it's about 3.5 to 4 hours apart from each other. And so for them to share anything, they would have to make that commute back and forth, which is just slightly unreasonable.
Okay, let's talk about your season, because okay, I'm doing my own podcast and I'm resuming all the races. And when I was looking at all rookies, I was like, okay, Marcus Armstrong is in Chip Ganassi, so because of that team he will have an advantage in points, of course. And when I was watching the races, I was like, I can't criticize you because I have the biggest problem with all rookies in this year, because Yeah, I saw a lot of, maybe not a lot, but some crashes. And you know,
Yes.
when I saw and I was preparing for this interview, I was like, I'm gonna watch the highlights again because I don't remember exactly what happened at the start of the season at St. Pete. Yeah, so there was wait, which race was that? Yeah, that was the first Indianapolis Grand Prix. Yeah, that was the moment when I remember that I was watching I was watching this race, and I saw that David closed your doors in the track, and I'm like, okay, people will talk about another accident, but it's not your fault. And there are many other situations. I mean, technical failures. I will sum up it. Your season is not as bad as some people think. Yeah, you must study every race to understand that. But you know, that's only my opinion. But I'm hearing that from very different drivers who were in Indy Lights, that Indy Lights is okay to get in IndyCar, but because of not so many ovals, this is very different and this is very difficult to you know, to be at Indy 500, to be part of it and maybe not to crash. It's easy to say, but if there is so much forces, driving on oval is, you must be a complete driver. Yeah.
Yes.
So how do you feel this year? How do you feel this season is going?
I think you said it very well. I don't believe it's as bad as people think it has been. There have been quite a few bad races, especially early on. But at the same time, I am disappointed in myself because I wanted more for myself. But I've also seen some good days. And so I think that, you know, as a rookie, it's my job to finish races, and we didn't do that as well early on, and get the experience that I need. And more recently, I've seen the benefits of that. Nashville, for example, another street course that we go to. I just wanted to make positions up because our qualifying was pretty poor. And so for myself, it was to be aggressive, but put myself in positions where someone can't crash me. And that's something that I've learned about a lot this year because, as you said, like the incident with David at IndyGP, it was just a wrong scenario. You know, neither one of us were in the right position. And so now understanding that and applying it, I can see the nuances of where do I need to place the car at the right moment in a brake zone or when I'm defending or when I'm passing, so that I don't give others the opportunity to ruin my day. So it's a defensive, offensive driving style. You got to have both. You have to be the complete driver, as you said, and especially on the oval, because the oval, you're dealing a lot more with the aero of the car. And when you're doing speeds of 230, 240 miles an hour, that could be a big difference between crashing or not crashing. And so for myself, Texas Motor Speedway was a great race up until the crash. And we were running top 13, and I was passing for that as well. And the car was very quick. But I got in a situation where the old versus the new tires were making a big difference. So I was closing the gap to a car in front that was on old tires. I didn't know that they were on old tires at the time, but I could see that they were slower than myself, and I underestimated the closing rates. And so the closing rates of a car doing 220 versus a car doing 190 is very, very quick.
Yeah.
And so on entry of turn one, because there's not really a brake zone, but you're still lifting and coasting in, you have to be very careful with the car because At those speeds, the rear of the car could lift and get loose. And so I had the option when I was closing to either go outside of him and not overslow and spin out, or run into the back of him. And he was checking up quite a bit, so it was compounded. And so when I saw that, I went to the outside and got in the marbles and lost the car in the marbles. So that was a very big learning experience. And then similar to Indianapolis, Indianapolis was a little bit different because our car was not in a window that was easy to drive with. We had a corded left front tire when almost a corded left front tire when I crashed into the wall. And so that made it difficult once I was pushed wide by Graham Rahal to bring the car back down across his aero wash, which is just a scenario that I learned from. And it's too bad because on an oval, you learn from experiences, but those experiences usually mean a crash. Versus a road course where if you make the same mistake, you get offline for a second, juggle the car a little bit, and then bring it back on and keep going. And so it's very different driving style that's required on ovals versus road or street courses.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree because in the oval the consequences are so high comparing to the road courses or the streets. I will add one thing to this. I mean, when you are starting from the back of the grid, which isn't your fault because you are driving the tail cones car, and no offense, but it's not Penske or Chip Ganassi, it's maybe in IndyCar are Dallara chassis in all teams, but you can develop several parts of car, and that makes a big difference. And when you are starting from the back of the grid, it just can happen that there is a crash in positions like yours, and you can be involved like in St. Pete, for example. Okay. What are your plans for the next season? What will be your dream to do?
I'm planning to be back in IndyCar.
Yeah.
I don't know if it'll be with the same team or not yet. We're still working on that. There are a few drivers that have a lot of experience and talent that are still undecided on where they're going, it sounds like. And so that kind of decides the future for myself and maybe a few other drivers, which is good. I mean, Alex Palou, for example, we don't know where he's going to be for sure, whether he's going to F1, is he going to stay at Ganassi. We thought that maybe he'd go to McLaren, but in recent news, it doesn't sound like that. And so that could open the door for other drivers to move there and open up other seats. But this is the crazy time of the year when everyone is, trying to dart back and forth between this conversation and this conversation and this conversation. And so my manager is Peter Rossi, who is actually Alexander Rossi's father. And so he has his finger on the pulse a little bit when it comes to driver seats and everything else. And so we're trusting him to have the right conversations at the right time. And he's done that so far for me in my career and had the right conversations. And so there are a few seats that we are talking to now, and hopefully by the end of the season we'll have an announcement to make on where I will be.
Yeah, I will say one thing, and it's of course my opinion, but when I saw your results in Indy Lights, I was like, this can't be a bad driver, and I really think that I'm certain that you will stay in IndyCar, and I really wish you that, because finishing Indy Lights and at the second place, it's not so easy.
That's correct.
And as I said before, there are many comparisons to F1, and I saw the one thing which I'm happy of that. Some people are bored of the F1 because it's different racing. There are so technicalities. You can build your own car basically. Of course, you must watch the rules, but you can have different approaches, and one of them maybe is the best. And why is, in your opinion, IndyCar worthy to watch?
The racing is much closer.
Yeah.
And even though currently there's a dominant driver in the championship with Alex Palou, he's not winning every weekend.
Yeah.
And that's because the talent level is so wide and so deep in IndyCar. It makes the racing that much better because there's a lot more strategy that's involved. There's a lot more behind the scenes that's involved. And because everyone is on, I won't say equal equipment, but in a spec chassis and with a similar motor, you get to see those philosophies don't change so much from season to season or car to car. And so that means that people can make or gain ground in the series or the championship with just small changes. And so someone that is close to the bottom edge can be to the top edge the next weekend. And so it just moves around a lot, and that adds a different element of surprise as well as inspiration, I think, because the drivers, they never know what the opportunities are going to be during a race weekend. And so you can see a lot more inspired drives weekend to weekend where they don't feel like they have to protect the car so much.
Yeah.
I mean, look at, for example, Indy Grand Prix this last weekend with Devlin DeFrancesco. The move that he made in turn one, I think, is the move of the year. And he was able to do that because he didn't think about the risk. He just knew what he had to do, and he was able to do it because he was put in the right opportunity at the right time. Yeah. And so those are the kinds of things that IndyCar offers over F1. F1, I think, is more maybe refined, but also sensitive in the sense that the teams are in bigger windows from the top tier to the bottom tier. So even if you make improvements, you don't move up very much. And the drivers are locked into what the teams are giving them. And so oftentimes the pressure is on the driver to finish a race rather than perform in a race, which is interesting in contrast to IndyCar, because IndyCar, you can move around so much that if you don't take those opportunities, then you're not going to be successful. And so F1 doesn't provide as much opportunity from team to team or driver to driver. It's usually one or two or three drivers in the championship that are pushing the series along, and then everyone else is kind of competing against each other, but it's a completely different race.
Yeah, and I remember when I was watching my first IndyCar qualifying, that wasn't Indy 500. Yeah, that was road course. I don't remember which one, but this was my obviously first weekend when I wasn't only watching F1, and I was like, oh, there is so small gap between drivers. And if in F1, if you have a good car and you are a competent driver, you can make the Q2, Q1. The result is you can get a great result. But in IndyCar, that's the setup in the weekend. That's the lap, and sometimes you do great lap, the time is very good, and someone makes maybe that's not maybe thousand, that's part of second, the little part of second, which is faster, and you are knocked out. So it's very very difficult. And the thing I really love in IndyCar is that various teams can win the race. We saw that we saw that in Gallagher Grand Prix when Scott Dixon won this race, but Graham Rahal challenged him the whole race. At the Gallagher Grand Prix, I knew that maybe we'll meet, so I was watching Where Are You? And I was like, oh, you're at the top 10. So you can get a good result when you are not in a top team. So it's very interesting, and when you make great setup, you can maybe get the podium, or in specific circumstances you can maybe get a win. That's the part of Indy 500 I love, and of course there's so much history in this racing. So I also recommend to watch this. Thank you very much for meeting me. It was really a pleasure. I wish you IndyCar seat in the next year, and I hope we'll meet, because maybe I'll be in some race, so there is a possibility I will wave to you. Yeah?
Very good.
Okay.
Very good. That sounds good.
Okay. Thank you very much. This thing with tires was amazing. That's why I love talking to the drivers. They're always telling me things I don't know or exist. Yeah. Thank you very much again. I wish you good results in the end of the season. And thank you very much. I hope we'll meet again.
Thank you. Me as well. I hope that you can come to an IndyCar race at some point and get to see it in person, because it's very exciting in person, as well as on TV. But to be here, I think, is something special.